Welcome to Lifting the Line, a construction contracting podcast.
Welcome to Lifting the Line. My name's Ali Broadbent, and today I'm interviewing Andy Shaw from Brickies Network. Lifting the Line is a podcast where we talk about building, construction, business, finance, health, and whatever else is of interest to the building and construction industry. So, Andy, how are you going today?
I'm fantastic today, Ali, actually. I'm really, really good.
That's great to hear. So I'm thinking, while I've got you, I would like to know a little bit about who you are and what you do. And I think our listeners would get a lot out of knowing a bit more about your background, especially about how Brickies Network got started. So can you remember back to when Brickies Network, maybe it was a bubble, maybe it was a simmer, maybe it probably didn't have the name Brickies Network to it just yet, but you knew something was coming in terms of the way you were thinking and planning for bricklayers. Yeah.
It started in 2012 in my mind because there'd been some stuff that had happened in my business that I just didn't see coming. And I've seen it so many times over the last 20 or 30 years that I was thinking, there's stuff that Brickies just don't know about running businesses.
So it was the business side of running.
It was the business side of it. Like where I started my trade, which was in the Ballarat region, on a whole, majority of them were very, very good bricklayers, very, very good tradesmen. But I saw stuff going on with business practices that just wasn't working, and I was having things that weren't working. That's where it first started, and that's probably 2012. But it didn't really come to being something that I was wanting to put together to help other bricklayers until 2019. 2019. I spent some time traveling. I thought, I want to document this. I want to document and put a book together. So I started writing a book, and I went through a whole process.
I remember that. I forgot about the book.
Writing a book about this is what most bricklayers seem to be doing.
Yes.
In general, doesn't seem to be working. I did this and it worked pretty well.
Yeah.
Had good profit margins. Everything seemed to be working well, but lost a lot of money to get there. And lost a relationship that went for a long time. And it always stemmed back to the way I was running my business. Well, that's how I felt at the time. There was obviously other factors involved because, you don't actually have a marriage breakup solely because you run a bricklaying business, but it was certainly the stresses were a massive contributor. And I went through and I wrote this book and I had it all written down by hand in a folder, and I found it the other day because I was looking for it. And I remember actually talking to you, Ali, saying, I've written this book. I want to get it published. And I rang a publisher, had a chat with him on the phone, who was someone that you connected me with, and I can't remember his name at the moment. And he said to me, the bricklayers read books. And I went, no. He goes, well, why the hell did you write a book? It was brutal, and it deflated me. He said to me, he goes, you should start a YouTube channel and just put advice on a YouTube channel.
Okay, all right. So it wasn't just the block of like going, what? There was a direction from that.
There was a direction from that.
That didn't help the fact that you'd just written that book.
Absolutely.
And you thought, but I suppose everyone's got their journey, right? Like of how they get where they get. And I actually, this part of like talking to people and getting to know their story is knowing that somewhere along the line, they've actually done a lot of different things that have kind of brought them to now. But you're not going to say, oh, the book is not what you're publishing today, or like, the business, you're not a bricklayer as much anymore. Are you still bricking every now?
I have very rarely picked up a trowel in about 18 months.
Okay. And so that doesn't mean that that's not relevant for what you're doing right now.
No, not at all.
But I do remember talking to you because I think one of the things that you were wrestling with was you were starting to realise there were traits with who you were where that made you vulnerable in the bricklaying industry as a person because you hadn't completed high school, you felt like your education, some self-esteem stuff was in there, which led to how you managed your business, realising,
100%.
and you were reflecting on that and going, how can I help bricklayers to believe in themselves, see their value, and that I remember you calling and talking about that.
Yeah. And because I felt like that at the time, bricklayers that were my age and maybe 5 years younger, you could nearly post us all in a box. That we were all like, if you took away the way they looked and maybe a couple of other little bits and pieces, there were some really common things that led us to being bricklayers. One, we probably weren't well educated. So we struggled at school. We struggled at school. We had some sort of learning difficulty, whether it be some sort of ADD or dyslexia or whatever it was. So that caused us to move out into a trade. We'd come from a background where there was an unstable home and maybe a parent or a father that was a big drinker or a gambler and maybe violent and knocked you around. And they were all very similar traits, very similar things. And I honestly felt like that you'd get on a building site, they were the nicest guys you've ever met. It was like you were talking to yourself. You're having banter and you're having good fun. But we were all struggling financially. We all drank a lot, maybe taking drugs. Like just these really poor behaviours that were affecting us being caught in a situation that wasn't really working for us as a whole. And you talk to blokes about what was going on, and there would be this common thing going on with brickies that'd get to maybe 50, and I'm only 30 at the time, that they were like really jaded, broken, and broke. It was really common, like nicest guys in the world, but they were shitty about the trade and they were angry about it because they didn't feel like they had anything. They didn't have any money. They had a broken relationship. The back was rooted. Like it was all just common, I was like, it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. Like,
yeah. And so something that's been highlighted with you is that you actually really love bricks.
Do you think?
I know. You love bricks and you love the technical side of it and the craftsmanship, if you like, of laying bricks.
Yep.
And even I appreciate the way a brick has been laid well. Like you can tell the difference between a good lay and one that's shoddy, basically. And there's a respect. Like you just go, that actually took craft, like skill, and beautifully done. And someone did not just wake up one day and say, I'm going to lay that and do it as perfect as if they did.
No.
So you love to, like, think about how you're caring about the person who's the bricklayer, but you're motivated also because you really love bricks.
Yeah, I really do. Like I remember the day I wanted to be a bricklayer. I remember this is my trade, and I'd already done an 8-week pre-apprenticeship course, and we were in a recession back in the 90s. So my apprenticeship was starting, but the bloke I was starting it with didn't have work for a few more weeks. So I actually paid to do another 8 weeks of schooling. I remember building a segmental arch. It took me ages. And the trade school teacher and we didn't kind of get along that well because I was 14 or 15 and I was mouthy and all the dumb stuff that kids are. And he'd been away for a few days and I'd spent all of this time really getting all the cuts perfect, cutting room and just getting the template right and I just took my time and it was mint. And it was the first time I'd ever done a double struct joint, which was like you sort of put a bit of a V in it. And he came in and he goes, oh, who built the arch? And I go, oh, I didn't. He goes, you didn't. And I was only like 4. And ever since then, I loved it. And there's something when you get to a point where you and lay bricks and you're confident doing it, that you get into this rhythm and it's really quite therapeutic and cathartic when you just get into this rhythm of language, and it's really enjoyable. But the other side of that is if you start a bricklaying business, you spend a lot of time on the job laying bricks because you love it, and your business fails because you don't go and do the bookwork side of stuff and really learn how to run a business because you're just a really good tradesman.
That's what brought you in.
That's what brought me into it. So, and honestly, there's a huge difference between day-to-day operations and being a bricklayer on the job to actually being the business owner. And it's almost a complete disconnect.
Yeah.
So it's very advantageous for you to actually know and have profound knowledge of the industry, but that's not the bit that actually makes you successful as a bricklaying business owner. And that really bothered me. Bothered me.
So you're on the road, you are reflecting on all these things, and you wrote your book thinking, if I'm going to make a difference, how am I going to do it? You actually came back to Geelong, didn't you? You came back to Geelong and worked in Geelong for a while in between your trips.
Yeah. So I'd spent about 6 months on the road just by myself. My marriage had broken down, so I was off finding myself a bit.
Wrestling crocodiles.
The wrestling crocodiles, there's a picture of me on the back of a crocodile somewhere. It was really important to find myself. And it can be quite confronting. And I had a mentor of mine ring me up and tell me, he goes, mate, what you're doing is pretty courageous. And I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, you've put yourself in a position where there is no one else to blame but yourself. And I went, what do you mean? He goes, so a lot of people go, I couldn't do that because I had kids at home. I couldn't do that because we've got a mortgage to pay. I packed everything up in my car, put a boat on the back and drove off, and good, bad or indifferent, whatever the outcome was 100% my responsibility. And I hadn't really thought about that. So I went off and found myself for 6 months. And then...
it sounds a bit Eat, Pray, Love, doesn't it? But the builder version, the bloke version. Have you seen Eat, Pray, Love?
I haven't seen Eat, Pray, Love, so it sounds like a good movie. But yeah, so that's where I did, and I did come back. I did come back with full intention of going to do more travelling, and so I came back at the end of 2019 to Victoria, fluffed around, really worked for some people, just filled my time to go. I was going travelling, and a big part of it was I still wanted to work on myself, work on business acumen by going to what was called Date with Destiny in Queensland, which is a Tony Robbins event. Paid up, ready to go, COVID lockdown. Stuck in Victoria. So it kind of clouded my vision of what I was doing. So I went back but I actually thought about it. I go, no, I still want to do more research about bricklaying because there's two sides to it. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
But I felt like bricklayers were getting walked over.
Yes.
They were getting walked over. And because there's got to be other factors. It can't just be them.
No.
There's got to be other factors that are contributing to it.
Yeah.
So one thing that bricklayers probably never think about is we all work in this new construction. So we don't really have a diversification area. So if new construction is slow, we're all fighting over the same pool of work because there's maybe 20,000 bricklayers in Australia and we're all fighting over that one lot of work. But if it gets a boom and with lots of houses being built, well then there's all of this work to do and only a certain amount of bricklayers to do it. So that means that it's either feast or famine. There's never just a normal even keel of there's always just the right amount of work for tradesmen. Right? And we didn't have anywhere to diversify. And I'll put it in an example where we go, a carpet layer, they do new houses and lay carpet. But they also do a renovation and get the carpet relayed over here. Or if the house floods for some reason, they do insurance work and replace the carpet. Well, no one ever rang me as a bricklayer and said, oh, my bricks have got flooded and we're going to pull them down and we're going to relay the bricks on my house. Or, oh, I'm tired of the colour of my bricks. I want to pull them all down and relay them. It doesn't happen in bricklaying, so we didn't do that. But then the other factor of it was we always worked for a builder. We never worked for the end client much, maybe some small jobs, but most of the work that we did was for a builder or a developer. And they'd already won the work or they controlled the flow of work. So it meant there was like a power dynamic there that you felt obligated to take what you were being offered because you might not get any other work. So, and so you end up accepting prices that are not really enough to break even because you're cornered. But I didn't know that until I actually took a job as a building supervisor on the premise of finding out what's going on in bricklaying, what's going on in the background for bricklaying. Because we didn't supply any materials. The manufacturers sold the bricks to the builders. They didn't sell it to the bricklayers, and we didn't install them, but we didn't supply them. So we didn't have control of the bricks. A lot of the time, the builder supplied all the materials. So sometimes we'd accepted a price that was pretty much break even, and I was doing it for years myself. And then we'd have hold-ups on the job because materials weren't delivered because we weren't in control of them.
So you're the building supervisor, what is that right?
Yeah.
And you are overseeing the whole build. You've got a lens or a particular radar for the brickies that build.
Yeah.
You're seeing some
So I was seeing some things from perspectives that just hadn't even come to my mind. I was like, well, what am I finding out? Like, so that was really evident to me that there's actually a bit of a power dynamic here that is making our industry so much more vulnerable. And the guys that are in the industry, very, very vulnerable, which I didn't realise that.
Explain some things.
It explained a lot to me.
Okay.
It explained a lot to me. Yeah. And we were losing bricklayers hand over fist, and we still are at the moment. We're losing bricklayers out of the industry because we're in a downturn. We're in a downturn. So they're leaving the industry. Well, the stats are that only about 20% of them come back. They find another job somewhere else, secure income, they don't come back. You can't blame them. But it takes that 4 or 5 years to create a good tradesman. And there's very few countries around the world that have the same building standards as we do. So it's very hard to bring bricklayers in from another country to fill the hole. So then I'm like, well, need a bit more research on this, what's going on. So after that, after I stopped working as a supervisor, I actually went travelling with my partner again. And we put in a caravan and it was nice to travel around Australia, good, even though I find it frustrating sitting on my bum and not doing anything. It was really just to go and work with different bricklayers all over Australia in different regions to see what's happening in those different regions and what are they dealing with. And on a whole, most bricklayers are dealing with the same thing, but just in different ways.
You know, because I've been around to see you on this journey, so I remember that stuff coming to light when you went travelling, took off with the boat in the back and all that. And I remember you coming back and you were site supervisor, and actually all those things that you were talking about that you were passionate about went quiet. And you got caught, you went back into a job that was quite demanding. And I remember thinking at the time, like it seemed like there was an awakening, but then that all sort of died down. And then when you stopped that, everything surfaced up, like to a degree. Some of that surprised you, that second time that it all came surfacing up again?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, because like when you're working and let's say you've got a passion or a love or something and you're working, it's very common for that passion to just go quiet. because you're in another job that doesn't foster, let it grow, or, allow it some room.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when you stopped site supervising and you went back on the road again, and then some of this stuff surfaced again. I was like, there it is.
It was always there, and it did.
Yeah.
And because we got locked down with COVID in Victoria, you just sort of, the vision of what you had to do, you weren't allowed to leave. You just had to do this. And so it had to go on the back burner sort of. Like, it didn't have to, but like I put it on the back burner. It was a choice. But then after traveling, like it amazed me that these guys were just caught. I remember stopping in a place called Dubbo. Right? And I went and worked with a young fella for a couple of days. Nicest kid you could ever meet. Right? And I'm talking to him and going, mate, what are you working for in this town? And in bricklaying, a lot of guys work for rates, and I don't believe rates really work, as in a per brick rate, attaching a labour cost to the unit. It doesn't really work now with the way construction is. But this young kid, he was working for, it was like $1.30 a brick, which that was just the standard in that region. But 200 k's away in Orange, I think it was called Orange, that they were working for $2 a brick. And I said to him, I go, mate, why aren't you putting your prices up? And he goes, if I put my prices up, the bloke down the road's going to get all the work, and I won't get the work. And I was like, mate, you can only lift up so many bricks and put them down every day. Like, we're capped out at how many we can lay. That bloke, he can take all the work in the world, but he can't do it. And he didn't quite get it. And I go, but the guys in Orange, they're not going to drive 200 k's to get work at $2 a brick when they're getting work for $2 a brick in Orange. So put your price up to $2 a brick, you're going to have to use you. It's a supply and demand issue, because we looked across the estate and there was probably 100 homes that had wrapping paper around the outside that were plastered on the inside because they couldn't get bricklayers. But this young kid was like, well, that's just what we can get here. But he didn't realise that another region, they're charging something completely differently for basically the same outcome for the builder, because they'd recognised that there was a supply and demand issue. So that meant that there was that power dynamic again.
Yeah.
And he would sit there and go, so can you find any workers? Oh, no, I can't find any workers. Well, the reason why is in that region, no one's put on apprentices to train them, because putting on staff is difficult, but also they never knew whether they were going to make enough money to pay an apprentice. So there was just this, and after travelling around Australia and seeing that, you get caught in your own region. That's where you live. And that's when I realised we actually don't have a national body that can actually have their finger on the pulse by communicating with everyone on what's going on across Australia. And that's what formed Brickies Network, is we need to teach these guys how to be really good business owners, show them the pitfalls that are happening, because we're working for builders and developers, and we all watch the news at the moment, and there's builders going bankrupt everywhere. But that's who we work for.
Yeah.
We're even more vulnerable than ever, but they don't realise it because this is just the way it was always done. Culture, just the way it's always done. But there is a different way. You just have to see that there's someone there that can show you. And that's what brought me to Brickies Network.
So you had a piece of paper in front of you, you're like brainstorming, or like what was some of the first connections you thought? When did you actually come up with the name Brickies Network?
I decided, what do we do? Like, what's the goal? It's about brickies. And it was really about everyone needs to know what's going on everywhere. So we actually need a network to be able to do that. Yep. So I went, Brickies Network. And that's where it started.
Registered the name.
And
set yourself up.
Yep.
And those first few developments, I suppose, like thinking, okay, this is what I know needs to happen. Tell me about some of those first few connections that happened to you that felt like, actually, this is good, right? This is happening. Yeah, because I know in those early days, it's like you had a little pathway open up.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. So
you weren't the only one who knew that this was needed.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Definitely not. So if I go back a little bit further, when I was first having trouble in 2012 in my business, I'd had a builder that didn't pay me, and I'd been through a court system or what's called VCAT, which is the Victorian Claims and Tribunal. And it was a bit like a court. And I went through, I won the whole thing. The guy was ordered to pay me my money and he never paid. And that's when I found out about protecting myself with the right documentation, having the right contracts in place, registering your security interest in a building company, security register. That was really profound for me. And so I thought, okay, when I started Brickies Network, we need to teach guys that. We need to teach them how to protect themselves. So I went off and I spoke to another bricklayer who I really believe he is a master. He is a master. And I'd met him back in 2012 there was an organisation that was trying to be started many, many years ago called the National Bricklayers Association, but it was very Victoria-based. The information they had was fantastic, but it costs a lot to fund an organisation. So, and you've got to have someone that's keen enough to fund it themselves to get it going until you start getting members. But it's time consuming. And this particular person that was running it, great vision, taught me a lot. I learned a lot from this particular guy, but he was getting towards retirement age. Right. So I reached out to him and had a few more, had a couple of chats and then thought, okay, I've got to find a younger guy that has got that knowledge of working. So another friend of mine who owns a bricklaying company in Victoria, he is very, very switched on with the way he runs his business. He's a business owner. He worked out pretty quickly that we all do pretty much the same thing. We lay bricks, but what sets you apart is the way you run your business.
Yep.
So I went and had a chat with him and talked to him about that. So that really made me think, okay, there's a couple of guys that are successful doing it. It can be done. I found that when I got my business model right, it worked really well too. So what do I do? And then started sharing that idea that I had with some other industry organisations. Yeah, I think we need to support these guys.
When it came to going, I know we need a network. And you've been, how old is Brickies Network now?
Brickies Network is a year and a half or a bit over 18 months, about 20 months old.
So I think it's really important that while Brickies Network is a year and a half old, 20 months, did you say?
20 months.
That actually, formatively, it's been going for a while and it's been coming. And that's, in a sense, building blocks to get to this structure that's been now established is working.
Yeah. The other real green light that made me think, yep, we need to help was definitely noticing after being a building supervisor, seeing those building companies struggling financially from what happened through COVID.
Oh, yeah.
I could see the writing on the wall there that these guys no builder ever decides that they want to become a builder not to pay their tradies or to go bankrupt. It doesn't happen. But some circumstances change that have in the industry through the COVID period, prices going up, labour shortages, all of these things has put them in a really tough spot. Most builders have struggled to make a profit for many, many years, knowing what was going on there. So I could see that happening because I was at the coalface of it in the building company. And then I happened to call up a guy that I knew that was from my hometown originally. And I remember after I'd been burnt by a builder and knew how to put some protection paperwork in place, I'd shared that paperwork with him. I'd get terms and conditions drawn up for the business. And I rewrote them all for his business. I said, mate, get your builders to sign this because it'll protect you, because he'd won a job that I'd quoted. And he'd quoted it cheaper than me. And I said, mate, you need to be concerned about these reasons. He's a new builder, so on and so forth. And I helped him out with some paperwork just because I wanted him to be protected. I didn't care about not getting the job. It actually didn't affect me. I had a pretty successful business at the time. So he didn't use that paperwork. And I'd spoken to, and so that was in 2012 or 2013. I spoke to him again in 2024, and he told me that he'd been burnt for over $100,000 in the last 10 years by builders going bankrupt and things not being in order paperwork-wise, and had no way of pursuing it. And I went, then we've got to do something about it. We've got to do something about it. And it wasn't all from one builder. It was multiple builders, but it had happened over a few periods. I was like, most brickies don't work on contracts. They don't put the right paperwork in place. They do jobs on handshake agreements. Well, our industry's changed so much now that you just can't trade like that.
Too much at risk.
Too much at risk. So that was like, we've got to help it, because we can't afford bricklayers to go broke, not get paid, and leave the industry because their customers have taken them with them when they went bust.
Andy, I think when we've had this convo today, I love that you love bricks, you care about the bricklayer, but you're very much also about the business. And nationally, you care about how the bricklaying industry is going to survive this whole, whole future. And so I think that's really great that you're being a part of that.
Yeah.
But you're coming at it from all these angles that, and they're the things I can see how much that drives you, that passion. You care about the bricklayer, love the brick, and that's really motivating you to do this really great work. So I think that's really great. So thanks for sharing a bit of your story. I've loved some of that, but I'm looking forward to some more stories around as we learn a bit and unpack a bit more this podcast.
Thank you.